Imagine for a second that you are the most feared man in rock and roll. To the media, you are a dark omen. To parents across the globe, you are a corrupted influence. To the church, you might actually be the devil himself. You are the prince of darkness, the frontman of Black Sabbath, and the voice behind the anthem that defined a generation. Paranoid. Your face is plastered on posters in every rebellious teenager's bedroom from Birmingham to Brooklyn. You can't walk down the street without causing a riot, but today you just want a haircut. You walk into a quiet local barbershop. You aren't wearing the stage gear or the heavy crosses. You're just a guy with long, shaggy hair looking to tidy up. You sit down in the heavy leather chair. The barber, a man who probably spends his Sundays at tea and his evenings listening to Frank Sinatra, wraps the white cloth tightly around your neck. He has no idea that the man sitting in his chair has spent the last year screaming into microphones and shaking the foundations of heavy metal. He just sees another long-haired kid who needs a trim. Then it happens. The radio dial turns, or perhaps a newspaper headline catches the barber's eye. The conversation turns to the state of music these days. The barber leans in, his sharp steel, scissors hovering just inches from your jugular, and he begins to vent. He starts talking about that dreadful noise on the charts. He specifically mentions that song, that loud, driving, aggressive track that's been topping the charts. He looks you dead in the eye through the mirror, unaware that he is staring at a legend, and he says the words that would go down in rock history. That guy who sang Paranoid, he's a complete and total maniac. He belongs in a madhouse, not on a stage. Sudden silence. Close up on Ozzy's eyes in the mirror. A slow, mischievous smirk begins to form. In that moment, the tension is thick enough to cut with those very scissors. Does Ozzy blow his cover? Does he get angry? Or does he do something much, much better? To understand how this moment even happened, we have to look at the world Ozzy Osbourne was living in back in the early 1970s. This wasn't the era of the internet or 24-hour celebrity news cycles. If you weren't on one of the 3 television channels available, people might know your voice, but they didn't necessarily know your face, especially if you weren't wearing your stage persona. At this point, Black Sabbath wasn't just a band. They were a cultural phenomenon that frightened the status quo. They were loud, they were heavy, and they were obsessed with themes that made the average person deeply uncomfortable. While the rest of the world was still humming along to Sugar Sugar by the Archies, Ozzy and his crew were inventing heavy metal in the dark, industrial heart of Birmingham. Now contrast that with the setting of our story, a traditional British barbershop. Shift the color palette from dark, Sabbath, purples and blacks to warm, sepia-toned browns and whites. This barbershop was a sanctuary of the old guard. It was a place where men went to talk about the weather, the local football scores, and how the youth of today were slowly ruining the country. It was smelled of sandalwood, cheap tobacco, and industrial-strength hair tonic. The barber himself was likely a man of routine, a man who prided himself on a clean shave and a respectable short back and sides. To him, long hair wasn't a fashion statement. It was a sign of rebellion, a lack of discipline or worse, a sign that you were one of those rock and roll types. Enter Ozzy. He walks in, likely looking a bit road-weary. He spent weeks under the hot lights of concert halls, breathing in the fog of dry ice and the sweat of thousands of fans. He's exhausted, his ears are probably still ringing from Tony Iommi's earth-shaking guitar riffs, and honestly, he just wants to sit still for 30 minutes. He doesn't want to be Ozzy Osbourne, the Prince of Darkness, for an hour. He wants to be John Michael Osborne, a bloke from Aston who needs a trim so he can see out from under his fringe. He settles into the chair. The leather creaks, a sound Ozzy usually associates with his biker jacket, but here it's the sound of a professional workspace. The barber shakes out a fresh cape, snaps it through the air with the precision of a bullwhip, and tucks it into Ozzy's collar. At this moment, the irony is peaking. You have the man who would eventually be accused of biting the heads off bats and snorting lines of ants, sitting perfectly still, draped in a white cloth, submitting to the authority of a man with a comb and a dream of a tidy haircut. The barber begins his work. The snip, snip, snip of the scissors is the only rhythm in the room. It's a peaceful, mundane scene, but the peace is about to be shattered. Because while Ozzy is enjoying the silence, the barber is looking for a reason to complain. He looks at the length of Ozzy's hair in the mirror, shakes his head with a sigh of disapproval, and prepares to launch into a rant that he will regret for the rest of his life. He's about to give his honest opinion on the maniac of metal, completely unaware that the maniac is currently paying him for a haircut. The haircut begins. For the first few minutes, there is only the rhythmic, metallic snip, snip, snip of the shears. It's a hypnotic sound, one that usually lulls a person into a state of relaxation. But for Ozzy, sitting in that chair, the atmosphere is about to shift from peaceful to profoundly awkward. The barber, a man of strong opinions and very little filter, starts with the classic small talk. He's working around Ozzy's ears, carefully thinning out the thick, dark mane that had become a symbol of heavy metal rebellion. He looks at the length of the hair he's cutting away and scoffs. To him, this isn't just hair. It's a symptom of a society losing its way. He starts talking about the good old days before the world got so loud and chaotic. Then, the conversation hits the tripwire. Maybe it was a song coming over the crackling airwaves of the shop's transistor radio, or maybe it was a disgruntled comment about the local youth scene, but the topic shifts directly to the charts. Specifically, it shifts to that noise coming out of Birmingham. The barber stops snipping for a moment, his comb poised in midair, and he sighs. It's the sigh of a man who feels personally offended by the evolution of music. "Have you heard this rubbish on the wireless?" he asks, gesturing vaguely toward the radio. "This group, Black Sabbath they call themselves. Dark, depressing, loud. It's not music, is it? It's just a bloody racket." Ozzy, ever the professional, stays silent. He's looking at himself in the mirror, watching the barber's reflection. He's likely fighting back a smirk, perhaps wondering if he should reveal himself right then and there. But the barber is just getting started. He's found a captive audience, a young man who seems polite enough, and he decides to go for the jugular. He leans in closer, the scent of his peppermint breath mixing with the sharp smell of the hair tonic. "And that lead singer," the barber continues, his voice dripping with genuine disdain. "That Ozzy fellow. I saw a picture of him. He looks like he's escaped from a Victorian asylum. The way he howls, the way he carries on. The guy who sang Paranoid is a complete and total maniac. He belongs in a madhouse, not on a stage." Take a second to realize the sheer, crystalline irony of this moment. Here is Ozzy Osbourne, the man who would eventually be known for the most legendary, high-octane, and often controversial antics in rock history. He is a man who thrives on chaos, who commands tens of thousands of screaming fans with a single clap of his hands. And yet here he is, draped in a cheap plastic cape, sitting perfectly still while a middle-aged man with a comb and a grudge insults his entire life's work, straight to his face. The barber continues to prune Ozzy's hair, completely oblivious to the fact that he is currently grooming the very maniac he's dissecting. He's talking about the moral decay of the country, blaming the loud guitars and the haunting lyrics for the downfall of the British youth. Every time he says the word maniac or madman, he's looking directly at the source of his frustration. For Ozzy, this is a surreal experience. It's a fly-on-the-wall moment that most celebrities never get to have. Usually, people are either screaming in adoration or running away in fear. To be treated like a nobody while being insulted for being a somebody is a psychological loop that few could handle with a straight face. The barber's scissors move closer to Ozzy's temple. The tension in the room is invisible to the barber, but for the audience watching this story unfold, it's electric. We are waiting for the explosion. We are waiting for Ozzy to bark or bite or stand up and reveal the truth. But instead, the maniac stays seated. He watches the silver blades dance around his reflection, listening to a stranger describe his soul as insane, while the world outside remains completely unaware of the comedy occurring inside these four walls. In any other setting, if a man called Ozzy Osbourne a maniac to his face, the results would be unpredictable, loud, and likely involve a bit of chaos. But here, Under the fluorescent hum of a local barbershop, something strange happens. Ozzy doesn't explode. He doesn't stand up, rip off the white cape, and scream the lyrics to Iron Man into the barber's face. Instead, he does something much more profound. He stays absolutely unnervingly still. This is the moment where the story becomes a legend. A montage of Ozzy's wilder stage moments, biting the bat, the frantic energy of a 1970s concert, contrasted with a still shot of him sitting calmly in the barber chair. Think about the internal monologue running through John Michael Osborne's head at this exact second. He is listening to a man whose job is literally to make people look more respectable, tear down his entire identity. To this barber, Ozzy is a monster, a freak, a sign of the end times. But to the man in the chair, Ozzy is just the job. Ozzy is the character he plays to provide for his family and express the darkness of the industrial Midlands. There is a deep, heavy irony in being told you belong in a madhouse while you are behaving with more grace and patience than the person cutting your hair. The barber is the one getting worked up. He's the one waving his scissors around with agitation, his face reddening as he complains about the noise on the radio. Meanwhile, the maniac is the calmest person in the room. He is the eye of the storm. As the barber continues his rant, he moves the comb through Ozzy's hair, thumping it against his scalp with the rhythmic beat of a man who is truly fed up. He starts describing the Paranoid album cover, or perhaps a grainy photo he saw in a tabloid. He's dissecting Ozzy's features, the eyes, the hair, the expression, all while looking directly at those very same features in the mirror. It's a real-life version of a superhero movie where the villain is trashing the hero, unaware that the hero is standing right behind them. Except in this version, the hero is a rock star with a penchant for the occult, and the villain is a guy who just wants everyone to get a crew cut and listen to the BBC macro shots of the barber's hands, veins popping slightly as he holds the scissors, showing his genuine frustration with the youth culture. Ozzy later recounted that he found the whole thing hysterical. There's a specific kind of freedom in being invisible. For a man who was quickly becoming one of the most recognizable faces in the world, this was a rare gift. He was getting an honest, unfiltered review of his work from a member of the general public. No filters, no record label PR, no obsessed fans, just a man and his scissors telling the truth as he saw it. And the truth was, to the normal world, Ozzy was terrifying. But as the haircut nears completion, the tension reaches its breaking point. The barber starts to do the final touches, the dusting of the neck with the talcum brush, the removal of the cape. The reveal is looming. Every viewer watching this is asking the same question. When is he going to tell him? Is Ozzy going to lean in and whisper, "I'm the maniac"? Is he going to sign the cape and leave it on the floor? Or is he going to do something even more Ozzy? Transition to a shot of the barber's face, looking satisfied with his work, oblivious, to the bomb sitting in his chair. The psychological weight of this section lies in the restraint. We live in a world where everyone wants to be seen, where everyone wants to correct someone who is wrong about them. But Ozzy chooses the path of the observer. He lets the barber have his moment. He lets the man believe he's won the argument against the moral decay of music. In Ozzy's mind, the joke was on the barber, and it was a joke that would last a lifetime. Because one day that barber would open a magazine or see a clip on the news and he would realize that the polite young man who sat in his chair for 45 minutes listening to him call the singer of Paranoid a lunatic was the singer of Paranoid himself. The silence in that shop wasn't just a lack of noise. It was the ultimate rock and roll power move. The transformation is complete. The maniac of metal has been tamed, at least on the surface. The barber, looking quite proud of his handiwork, brushes the stray hairs off Ozzy's shoulders with a soft, bristled brush. He's finished his sermon. He's vented his frustrations about the loud guitars, the screaming vocals, and the moral decay of the youth. He feels lighter, more satisfied, having shared his expert opinion on the state of the world with a young man who sat there and took it like a champ. He holds up the hand mirror, circling Ozzy to show him the back of his head. "There you go, son," the barber says, his voice now a bit warmer, more paternal. A proper haircut. You look like a respectable member of society now, not like those long-haired loonies on the television. Ozzy looks at himself in the mirror. He sees the man the barber wants him to be, a clean-cut, quiet kid from Birmingham. But behind those eyes, the maniac is screaming with laughter. Visual. Extreme close-up of Ozzy's reflection. The light catches his eyes, and for a split second we see a flash of the rock star, the wild energy that defines Black Sabbath. Now comes the moment of truth. This is the climax of our story. Ozzy stands up from the heavy leather chair. The cape is gone and he's back in his own skin. He reaches into his pocket to pay the man. At this point in the 70s, a haircut in a shop like this probably cost less than £1. It was a simple transaction for a simple service. But for Ozzy, this was a performance. He wasn't just paying for a trim. He was paying for the greatest comedy show he'd ever been a part of. Imagine the tension as Ozzy pulls out his wallet. The barber is standing there, hand outstretched, probably still humming that Sinatra tune from earlier. He's completely oblivious to the fact that the hand reaching toward him is the same hand that holds the microphone for the biggest band in the world. He's oblivious to the fact that the maniac he just finished insulting is about to pay his rent for the week. The coins clink together with a heavy metallic sound that echoes like a drum beat. In some versions of this legendary rock lore, Ozzy doesn't say a word. He simply hands over a tip that is far too large for a standard haircut. A tip that should have been the barber's first clue that this wasn't just a normal kid. In other versions, Ozzy leans in, a mischievous glint in his eye, and says something subtle, something that would only make sense to the barber hours or even days later. He might have said, "The maniac says thanks for the trim," or perhaps, just, "I hope the music gets better for you, mate." But the true beauty of this story isn't a grand revelation. It isn't Ozzy shouting his name and demanding an apology. The true climax is the silence. It's the fact that Ozzy walks out of that shop, the bell chiming over the door one last time, leaving the barber in total, blissful ignorance. Ozzy walking out of the shop into the gray, rainy streets of 1970s, England. He puts on his sunglasses, pulls up his collar, and disappears into the crowd. Think about that barber's life after that moment. He goes home, has his tea, tells his wife about the nice young man he saw today, and probably repeats his rant about that awful singer from Black Sabbath. He goes to bed feeling like he's done his part to keep the world orderly. He has no idea that he just had a brush with greatness. He has no idea that he spent 45 minutes with his hands in the hair of a legend. He has no idea that he gave a haircut to the very man he called a maniac. The irony is a slow-burn fuse. It's a bomb that doesn't go off until the barber eventually sees a picture of Ozzy in the Daily Mirror or on Top of the Pops a week later. Can you imagine that moment? The realization hitting him like a freight train? The cold sweat as he remembers every insult, every condescending comment, and every snip of the scissors he took while mocking the man in his chair. For the barber, it's a moment of pure, unadulterated cringe. For Ozzy, it's just another Tuesday in the life of the Prince of Darkness. This is why the story has survived for decades. It's not just about a haircut. It's about the divide between who the world thinks we are and who we actually are. It's a reminder that sometimes the maniacs are the ones sitting quietly in the chair, and the normal people are the ones holding the scissors. So why does this story matter? Why are we still talking about a 50-year-old haircut in a dusty shop in England? It's because this encounter perfectly encapsulates the dual life of Ozzy Osbourne and the massive disconnect between the Prince of Darkness and the human being beneath the long hair. For the barber, Ozzy was a symptom of a world gone mad. He was a caricature, a headline, a maniac who existed only to shock and offend. But to the man sitting in that chair, the maniac was just a job. The real Ozzy was a guy who could sit through 45 minutes of insults with a smirk on his face and still leave a generous tip. This story highlights a recurring theme in the history of heavy metal: the fear of the unknown. Black and white, footage of satanic panic news reports or protesters from the 80s. contrasted with Ozzy laughing in an interview. Throughout the 70s and 80s, Ozzy was the ultimate boogeyman. He was blamed for everything from societal decay to the corruption of the youth. People who had never heard a single one of his songs, like our friend the Barber, had already formed a complete, unshakable opinion of who he was. They saw the maniac, but they never looked for the man. The beauty of the Barber story is that it's the ultimate "I told you so." It proves that the very person the world was terrified of was often the most grounded person in the room. It reminds us that the people we judge most harshly are often the ones who are the most comfortable in their own skin. Ozzy didn't need to defend himself to the Barber because he knew exactly who he was. He didn't need the validation of a stranger with a pair of scissors, and he certainly didn't care about being respectable in the eyes of someone who lived in a different world. But let's talk about the Barber one last time. A slow, atmospheric shot of an empty, dark barbershop at night. Can you imagine the moment he finally realized? Maybe it was a few days later, while he was eating his dinner and a Black Sabbath performance came on the television. He looks at the screen. He sees the eyes. He sees the way the man moves. And then he sees the hair, his haircut. The realization must have been like a physical blow. The maniac he had been trashing was the same nice lad who had sat in his chair, listened to his boring stories, and paid him for the privilege of being insulted. That Barber became an accidental part of rock and roll history. He is the man who fixed the Prince of Darkness. And in doing so, he gave us one of the greatest anecdotes in music history. A story about identity, irony, and the sheer comedy of being a superstar in a world that doesn't always recognize you. Very high-quality modern photo of Ozzy looking directly at the camera.
Now, I want to hear from you. If you were sitting in that chair and someone started trashing your life's work, would you have stayed quiet like Ozzy, or would you have blown your cover immediately? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you're a fan of these hidden moments in rock history, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We've got a massive deep dive coming up next on the time Ozzy, insert another story teaser like the bat incident, that you absolutely do not want to miss. Thanks for watching, and remember, stay loud, stay heavy, and maybe watch what you say to your barber. You never know who's sitting in the chair. Fade to black as the final iconic gong from Black Sabbath, the song, rings out.